Let's take a direct look at the line of combat engagement. Today we'll start with the section of the front, let's call it around Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. Overall, as of today, we are talking about quite a large and expansive area with a total length of well over 70 kilometers. That is if you count from the village of Muravka along with Novomykolaivka in the far southwest. And then this entire front line stretches all the way across the landscape. With all its various curves and bends, it extends all the way to the northeast, specifically to the section located between Kuchayavi Yar and Sofivka. In fact, the enemy launches attacks every single day, sometimes even around the clock, and does so along the entire length of this stretch of the LBZ, which is more than 70 kilometers long. At the same time, the enemy's losses, at least according to reports from the Ukrainian General Staff last week, have exceeded those of the previous week. 290 enemy soldiers eliminated per 1 square kilometer of captured Ukrainian territory. And this is not only in the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad direction, but across the entire front. But considering that the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad sector remains one of the hottest spots, it is absolutely clear that the Moscow generals have no regard for their expendable infantry here. On the other hand, again, according to the Ukrainian General Staff, for at least the past 2 months, the Kremlin has no longer been able to fully compensate for its losses with new recruits in its frontline units. The sectors, areas, and strategic directions of the fiercest, most intense confrontations remain virtually unchanged here. These zones include Sofivka, Shakhove, Kuchery Yar, Novoe Shakhove, Dorozhnya Ivanivka, and Belitske on the far eastern flank. The entire stretch along the T05-15 highway, which connects Pokrovsk with Dobropilia, on the section from Suketsky and Dorivna, a continuous battle is essentially ongoing. It is particularly important and worth noting separately that the confrontation is currently taking place across virtually the entire geographical territory of Rodinsky. As of today, this includes the southwestern outskirts of Lyman. And it should be specifically noted and emphasized, at least according to the official reports coming directly from our military headquarters, that in Myrnohrad itself, particularly in its northwestern part and around the northern outskirts of Svitla, clashes are still ongoing. Quite obviously, the specific area and the point located right around the intersection of the highways. May 15th, which we mentioned today, and N32, which actually comes from Kostiantynivka. From Kostiantynivka, it leads to Pokrovsk and then turns into the highway to Dnipropetrovsk. This section here, such a main logistical hub, appears to be under the control of the Muscovites as of today, as is the village of Rivny, which adjoins this area from the northeast. At the same time, the most optimistic open sources show the presence of pockets of Ukrainian resistance, at least in the northeastern part of Myrnohrad itself, and a more or less stable line of Ukrainian defense, which now stretches mainly north of the Hryshenka River, goes to Hryshin itself to its eastern outskirts, then on the western flank passes through Kotline, the northern outskirts of Udakhna, and crosses conditionally. In the area of the administrative border between Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk regions, it crosses the Solona River and is already approaching Novomykolaivka and Muravka on the southern bank of the river. A serious factor in this sector remains the vast so-called interpositional space, or what is commonly referred to as the gray zone, between the established Ukrainian defensive line and the forward hideouts of the occupiers. The distance between them here in most cases reaches up to 3 kilometers and in some places exceeds 5, but it is definitely territory, a vast territory, where both Ukrainian forward positions and situational hideouts of the occupiers are present at the same time. As before, the main strike force of the Muscovites, particularly on the eastern flank, consists of assault groups from about 5 Russian motorized rifle brigades of the 51st Combined Arms Army. In particular, the following are attacking here: the 1st, 114th, 132nd, and 9th Brigades, and directly in Myrnohrad. In terms of primary offensive operations, the 5th Motorized Rifle Brigade is currently advancing through Pokrovsk to the north and towards Hryshin. First and foremost, the enemy is actively deploying regiments of the 76th Air Assault Division, units of the 2nd Combined Arms Army, including at least the 71st Separate Battalion and the 24th Special Purpose Brigade. In the western part of the sector, where previously the Muscovites operated with the main forces of their 41st Combined Arms Army. For more details about the dynamics of events in this sector, particularly around and near Myrnohrad, I hope we now have the opportunity to speak with the press officer of the 38th Separate Marine Brigade, named after Hetman Petro Sahaydachny, Miroslav Krivoruchko, who is joining us in the studio. Miroslav, welcome.
I am wishing you very good health.
First, I want to draw our viewers' attention. A QR code should appear on your screens. This time, the fundraiser is for an SUV. For the soldiers of the 38th Marine Brigade, it goes without saying that reliable transport is the key to connecting the rear with the frontline positions. So, if you can, don't stay on the sidelines. Support this aid for the front. Miroslav, the first question is almost a ritual now, but it's impossible not to ask it. So, I'll ask you directly. Are Ukrainian soldiers still present directly in Myrnohrad? Or has the war already completely rolled beyond the northern and western outskirts?
The situation in the Myrnohrad area remains difficult and dynamic. The fighting is highly fluid and maneuverable in nature, and to speak of a definitive line that is positioned well beyond the city limits would not be entirely accurate. In certain areas, fighting is still ongoing, and the situation can change rapidly depending on the circumstances. So this is not a story about the war having completely receded somewhere and no longer affecting the city at all. The city remains a combat zone.
Tell me, has the intensity of enemy attacks in the sector at the end of February changed in any way compared to the beginning of the month? And how does the enemy's attempt to storm the Ukrainian defensive line look overall now?
Well, look, the intensity of attacks at the end of the month remained high. The enemy is constantly trying to maintain pressure. It's not a wave-like situation with a complete pause and a sudden surge. It's more of a systematic strain. And of course, there are landings as well. As for a stable line in urban combat conditions, it's not a continuous trench, it's a network of positions, strong points, and control over specific streets and buildings. You could say it's a defense system with separate resistance nodes that interact with each other.
Miroslav, is the enemy's armored vehicles currently appearing on the front line? Or are all the attacks by the Russians exclusively infantry-based?
Armored vehicles are used from time to time, but very cautiously. The primary tactical instrument of the enemy is their assault groups. These vehicles are utilized either for the transportation of infantry personnel or to provide fire support in certain specific areas. There are currently no massive armored breakthroughs observed in urban areas.
Literally just the other day, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the current Commander-in-Chief General Syrsky, announced the liberation from the Muscovites of at least 400 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory, apparently since the beginning of February, let's put it that way, and the clearing of at least 8 settlements from small assault groups of the occupiers. Exactly which settlements were meant has not yet been specified with reliable information. Obviously, this makes a certain amount of sense, but open sources do allow us to fairly clearly identify the main directions of the counterattacking efforts of the Ukrainian tactical grouping. Air assault troops, separate assault brigades and units, regular mechanized units of the armed forces of Ukraine, and territorial defense battalions in the Huliaipol sector of the front. These are primarily the Sosnivka directions. Ternove, Oleksivka, Kalinivske, the area restored near Oleksandrivka, Naverbove and Vishneve, together with Yehorivka. It is evident that a little earlier Ukrainian soldiers managed to completely clear out the small Moscow infantry groups. The polygon of Andrivka, Bratske, Herasimivka, Ostapivske and Danilivka. There was no continuous enemy presence in this area, but certainly attempts. The assault group of Rashid's 5th Tank Brigade and the 64th Motorized Rifle Brigade, let's put it that way, to gain a foothold at least on the eastern bank of the Hychel and to establish their positions further to the west. Such attempts near the R85 highway definitely took place at the end of January. As for Danilivka itself, which is located directly on the R80 highway, Number 5 is located approximately next to the highway around here, and it seems that as of now it remains in the gray zone. It is worth separately mentioning the northeasternmost sector of the front. It appears that this is exactly where the Muscovites have redeployed their 69th Cover Brigade. And this area within the polygon formed by Oleksandrohrad, Voskresenka, Sichneva and Novoselivka is, at least situationally, Is it perhaps the only one? In the entire Huliaipol sector of the front, where the Muscovites continue systematic pressure with an overall focus on the eastern outskirts of Velikomihailivka, in the Huliaipol sector of the front, where the main attacking force is the 5th Combined Arms Army of the Rashists, which probably not without reason was considered the most combat ready. In the entire Vostok group of forces, it was for a long time the main one. The strike force of the Muscovites on this flank. So here, it seems that by the end of last week, Ukrainian soldiers managed, at least it appears so, to completely clear the territory on the western bank of the Haichel River of Muscovites, at least in the section from Novozaporizhzhia to Varvarivka, including both Dobropilya and Priluki, but the fighting here remains frankly fierce, with both sides advancing toward each other. Literally just the other day, the Russians, using the already mentioned 5th Tank Brigade and the 60th Motorized Rifle Brigade, apparently launched a series of counterattacks in the direction of that same Dobropilya, likely aiming for Kosivtseve. It's too early to talk about a stable presence of the occupiers. At the moment, there seems to be no reason to believe so in either of these settlements, but the fact remains that the enemy here is not laying down their arms, at least for now, and that is an established fact. And perhaps the most threatening situation is in the southernmost part of the sector, specifically directly around Huliaipol, where the Russian 114th Motorized Rifle Regiment of the 127th Motorized Rifle Division and the 57th Motorized Rifle Brigade are attacking directly through Huliaipol to the west. And in the northern direction, the 38th Russian, the Motorized Rifle Brigade of the 35th Combined Arms Army, which operates south of the city, tries to assault the Ukrainian defensive line every day. Here, they are trying to expand this bridgehead already on the western bank of the Haichel River. The main direction of the enemy's attacks here is along the western flank, bypassing Olena Kostiantinivka towards Sviatopetrivske, Stara Ukrainka, Tsvitkove, and in fact towards Zaliznyshne from the south and from the east. The Ukrainian General Staff insists that the Muscovites do not have full control over this territory, including Huliaipol, or so it is claimed. Fighting continues here, including within the city itself, but most sources insist that the war has already moved beyond both the western and northern outskirts of the city. Right now, we have the opportunity to hear a few details about the operational situation in the southern sector, particularly on the Pokrovsk-Huliaipol section of the front. The commander of the 1st Separate Assault Regiment, named after Dmitro Kotsyubailo, Captain Dmitro Filatov, call sign Perun, is already connected to the studio. Mr. Dmitro, welcome.
Greetings to the studio, greetings to the viewers.
Before I ask any questions, would like to draw the viewers' attention. The QR code, as usual, this time is for raising funds for 5 specialized mobile stabilization points for the soldiers of the 1st Separate Assault Regiment. Such stabilization points truly help save the lives of our wounded soldiers. They are needed here due to the very intense fighting, so if you can, don't stay on the sidelines when it comes to this extremely important assistance. Mr. Dmitro, first of all, can you tell us what is currently happening in the sector controlled by your regiment? So the further displacement of the enemy to the east continues, as I understand it, already on the eastern bank of the Haichul. Have Ukrainian counterattacks in the Oleksandrivka and Huliaipol sectors slowed down for now?
Our attacks take place depending on the weather conditions. We try not to take unnecessary risk with our personnel, and we strategically execute and conduct our offensive actions only during those specific periods when the greatest possible number of critical factors that influence a successful and impactful outcome are aligned in our favor and working to our advantage. That is, these are weather conditions, the exhaustion of the enemy, accordingly, the density of the soil itself. We decide whether to enter with mechanized units or on foot. Consequently, our offensive military operations are not being executed with a consistent level of maximum daily intensity.
Let me clarify, and you can decide whether to answer or not. If we are talking about such settlements as Dobropilya, Priluki, Varvarivka, can we say that they are currently under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine? Yes.
These settlements are completely under control. Moreover, the area controlled by the defense forces extends much further.